What's up guys, RBG here, back with another video on Marvel's Avengers, and before we jump into today's discussion, I want to give a big shout out to today's sponsor, World of Warships Legends. It's a free-to-play / free-to-win MMO action game that grants you access to these powerful ships from the World War I and II eras. Since it boasts many ship types and battle tiers, there are many ways you can go about playing. It offers you a smooth, comfortable, and dynamic experience with its controls and adaptive user interface for current consoles. It also offers beautiful graphics and grandiose soundscapes to carry you away to the seas for a tactical session or a good old naval brawl. And if you're not satisfied with the historical aesthetics, then you're in for a big treat. World of Warships knows that we love Transformers, and they just so happen to be collaborating with that particular brand. So you can pilot Autobot and Decepticon inspired ships with their respective commanders. That's right, the mighty Cybertronians are ready to leave their mark, and you can enlist the help of 4 iconic Transformers characters who will be released as unique skins with special animations. Choose the most appealing bundles to you and get permanent camouflages, commanders with recognizable voiceovers, containers, and much more. As a special offer, we're giving away a Tier 2 Premium Ship Aurora, 3 days of a premium account, and 75,000 credits to give you a bit of a jumpstart. So download and play the game now. You can do so by clicking the link that will be provided in the description box below. One ship shall rise, the other shall sink. But yeah guys, I wanted to do something a little different for today's video. It seems like whenever we talk about this game, we can't go without mentioning another AAA title from the Marvel alumni, and that is Marvel Spider-Man for the PS4. A game that's seen critical and commercial success for not only giving us awesome gameplay, but also granting us with that stellar single-player story-driven experience that Sony has been absolutely killing it with for all their exclusives. Insomniac Games did such an excellent job with it that many of the detractors of Marvel's Avengers have claimed that the studio should have worked on that game instead of Crystal Dynamics. Understandably so, fans just couldn't get on board with Marvel's Avengers because of how unpolished it was, and there's the overall design choice that instantly made fans lash out in outrage because the Avengers didn't look like the actors from the MCU films. Although I didn't necessarily agree with the characters looking like their cinematic counterparts, I couldn't deny that their designs did leave a lot to be desired. But the thing I was instantly sold on was how this game would be giving us multiple characters to play with as opposed to one hero. I've said this millions of times, but tackling 6 heroes in one ambitious game is a huge goal to accomplish. And I know people are going to come with the argument that the Ultimate Alliance games managed to do this with double the amount of characters, but I just gotta briefly point out that although those games had an expansive roster, the gameplay and movesets were so bare boned that it's not even comparable to Marvel's Avengers. Not to mention that there were games that were pushed out by Activision, and ironically enough, the Spider-Man franchise had also been suffering at the hands of that brand before the license with Marvel expired. So yeah, ever since Marvel has partnered up with Sony to allow them to do solo Spidey games, we've seen limitless potential. Firstly, we have to talk about what really makes Marvel Spider-Man stand out, and that's the gameplay. Anytime we think of what would make for the perfect Spider-Man game, we instantly think of things like the web swinging, because you absolutely have to nail the traversal element. And there's a lot that goes into it. The developers have to make sure you're swinging at the right speed. They have to make him do all the signature moves. And the webs must, and I mean absolutely must, attach to building surfaces. We don't need no invisible clouds to thwip our webs to. And thankfully, Insomniac made this their top priority and superseded our expectations. It's almost as if they had momentum in mind, because it's damn near impossible to bump into something unless you mistime your swing or you completely suck at web swinging. And the combat feels better than it ever has before. You can bounce off of walls to string up combos, you can transition your swings into launchers, and the customizable gear system grants you endless possibilities. It's almost as if everything is perfect, but there were a few glaring issues. Which brings me to my first point. Although Marvel Spider-Man delivers a pretty solid experience, people act like it's a flawless game, especially when they compare it to Marvel's Avengers. One of the biggest gripes I hear people say is that Marvel's Avengers feels uninspired compared to that of Marvel Spider-Man. It gets called cliche for borrowing elements from other games from its respective genre, with some downright condemning the game for these problems. While I agree that it does take a lot of pre-established elements and occasionally mishandles them, we can't act like Marvel Spider-Man brings anything new to the table, because it really doesn't. You may not have noticed this unless you're a fan who's been playing Spidey games since Activision had their grimy hands on them, but Insomniac doesn't really do anything different outside of properly executing what they implement. It's almost like they looked at games like Spider-Man 2, the movie, Web of Shadows, and The Amazing Spider-Man and picked what worked about them, except they just improved upon what the respective developers didn't have time to polish. From the car chase sequences where you have to switch to different sides of the vehicle to avoid enemy fire, or performing stealth takedowns while being perched on a high ledge. When they're not borrowing from previous Spidey games, they're borrowing from other superhero games like the Batman Arkham series, and they take a surprising amount of elements there. We already know what the most borrowed element from the Arkham games is, and that's the combat, or more so the counter system. Rocksteady has pretty much defined what combat should be in action games, so it's easy to understand why other developers followed suit. When you see shield-wielding enemies, you instantly know that there will be some kind of vaulting mechanism you'll need to perform to leave them stunned. Marvel's Avengers even utilized this, so it doesn't get a pass either. But unlike Marvel's Spider-Man, it doesn't use other concepts from the Arkham games like the cryptographic sequencer or satellite hacking system, which is pretty much a beat for beat copy. Like, let's be real, Insomniac didn't really try to make any changes to make this feel like anything different. They even utilized the detective mode where you scan various items. And I'm not saying this to take points away from Marvel Spider-Man, because like I said, it's a solid game. But I'm just trying to get you guys to understand that it's not perfect, and it doesn't bring anything new to the table. If we're going to criticize Crystal Dynamics for taking inspirations from games like Anthem and Destiny, then we have to give that same energy to Insomniac Games for taking things from the Arkham series. What I give them credit for doing better than Crystal is implementing all of these elements and not falling flat on their face in some areas. Marvel's Avengers has so much going on to the point that some of the things it features makes it feel like it's having an identity crisis. Although it boasts a story-driven campaign with stellar voice acting and motion capture, it occasionally suffers from disjointed missions. On one hand, you have those tightly structured set pieces that put you on the edge of your seat. It's something that Crystal has become so good at with their Tomb Raider reboot games, where they constantly throw you into scenarios where one move can end your life. But they occasionally add in these dull filler missions that disrupt the immersive flow the story offers at the beginning. And many critics have pointed out that this is because the developers prioritized the looter shooter / brawler aspect over everything else, and they tacked on the story campaign later to make it feel like a complete game. This is another one of those things that makes Marvel's Avengers and Spider-Man so different. Insomniac Games knew that they wanted to deliver a single player campaign experience and nothing more than that. There is no huge grinding curve where you have to farm to find specific gear pieces to level up your character's power level. You simply earn new moves and gear as you progress through the story. I feel like if Crystal Dynamics had their say-so in what they wanted to do with the game, they would have followed a similar strategy. But as we all know, Square Enix is the boss and they call all the shots. Given how lucrative the games as a service business practice is, they were going to absolutely prioritize money over quality. And I'm willing to bet that there was a power struggle that went on during the developmental process for making Marvel's Avengers. And that's not to say that the game is a completely broken, play-to-win, unplayable mess, but it just feels like there wasn't a definitive sense of direction. Something else that Insomniac had the luxury of doing as opposed to Crystal is spending a majority of their time to work on one character as opposed to 6. Of course you can include Mary Jane and Miles Morales, but they really don't feature that many mechanics to accompany their stealth gameplay. They can't even fight, so let's just dismiss that argument altogether. A majority of the development went into Spider-Man's combat and traversal, and that's a pretty tall order on its own when you're trying to come up with all of these unique ways to make the character stand out. But when you're trying to give that same level of attention to 6 characters, it can be impossible to deliver a completely polished game. No matter how much control you have over a project, if you're juggling this many components, you're bound to make a few mistakes. In an interview, one of the team members from Crystal stated that Black Widow was the first character they had worked on, which is kinda obvious because she's one of the funnest characters to play with in online missions. Although she's the most grounded Avengers member in terms of abilities, she's one of the most elusive characters to play around with. I've also pointed out that since Crystal has a history of working on dual pistol wielding characters, that Black Widow would have been a cinch to pull off. But when the team has to put in an additional 5 characters who each offer distinctly different playstyles, that easy endeavor can become a nightmare, because by simply adding those other characters you instantly upset the balance of what you initially established. Even though one character may be incredibly stronger or faster than the next, you still have to develop them in a way that makes them equal to the others. And since this game will be adding a lot of post-launch characters to its roster, things will inevitably change every time, because the developers have to see how each new character stacks up against other existing characters. So this in and of itself will continue to affect Marvel's Avengers for better or for worse. But in a way, this gives the game an edge over Marvel Spider-Man. As much as people like to argue that the open sandbox experience the game gives you makes it miles better than Marvel's Avengers, they never really talk about how much they play the game. Having the ability to swing around New York is fun and all, but if Insomniac isn't constantly updating you with things to do within that world, it'll eventually become stale. After completing the main campaign and the City That Never Sleeps DLC, I was honestly bored with the game. I had gotten everything I wanted out of it, and I patiently waited for what was next for our web slinger. And I was perfectly fine with that since Marvel Spider-Man did what it was supposed to do. It gave me those awesome missions and it made me feel like Spider-Man. But it was only right that I point out that the hours spent playing it pale in comparison to the hours fans spend playing Marvel's Avengers. Since it's an online RPG looter shooter brawler, it goads the player to constantly grind for rare gear to make their character stand out from others. I often find myself playing alongside my friends and seeing their awesome in-game builds for their characters like Captain America and the Hulk. And this in turn inspires me to go out and farm for my gear so I can come up with the ultimate character to show off to all my friends. Like, I know that people act like the gear is pointless since it doesn't affect your character's outward appearance, but you can't deny that seeing those elemental effects devastate your enemies doesn't give you that sense of satisfaction. I find it funny that people even use the whole cosmetics debacle against Marvel's Avengers since Marvel Spider-Man has the same problems. Like, your costume really doesn't serve any real purpose outside of just looking cool. Even though they come with skills, you can equip those perks to any suit you want once you unlock them. And I remember people saying I was being a little too harsh from the game when I said that I wished I could actually craft the suits or change the color of pre-existing suits. But anyways, I say all of that to say this. Although both of these games just so happen to be AAA titles under the Marvel game umbrella, they are distinctly different. You may have noticed how anytime I talked about their flaws and compared them to the other game, I came off a little unfair. And that's because they both have their own thing they're trying to accomplish. One sets out to deliver a single player experience while it perfectly executes pre-established elements that it borrowed from its predecessors. You can occasionally go back and replay it, and every now and then you can repeat the missions, but it's not one of those games that you're going to be playing for years to come. The other title, on the other hand, is meant to be that long-running game. It features 6 diverse characters who have deep mechanics, and you can play online with other players. But it's not as polished as it should be because it's juggling so much at once and it doesn't have a solid sense of direction. At the end of the day, we should have the freedom to enjoy what we want without having someone point out why one game is vastly superior over the other. I absolutely hate picking these games apart because I know that each team put a lot of work into them, and I know they're very supportive of one another. When Marvel's Avengers officially launched worldwide, the creative director for Marvel Spider-Man, Brian Intihar, showed his support for the game. There's obviously mutual respect there, and he doesn't see Crystal Dynamics as an enemy of Insomniac Games. If the two studios don't have any beef with one another, then I don't see why we have to make it seem like there is one. There doesn't have to be this all-out war between the two games. But yeah guys, tell me what you think about today's video regarding these two games. Do you feel like one is better than the other in specific ways? Or do you think it's a waste of time to even compare the two? Let me know down in the comments below. As always, I ask you like or dislike the video. It doesn't have to be a thumbs up, it can be a thumbs down. Any feedback is good feedback and will only help me improve on future videos. But if you really enjoyed the video, it would help me out tremendously if you shared it with all your friends and followers on social media. Sharing really makes a difference. But once again, this is your boy RBG signing out on another video. I'll catch you guys later. Peace out.